In this final lesson of this splashing water project, we're going to go ahead and make the final adjustments to the simulation, and then also briefly discuss exporting the mesh sequence from Realflow back into your primary 3D package. So let's go ahead and take a look at where we left off last time. And before we start to talk about the actual process of getting this back into your other 3D package, I want to take just a few minutes to talk about a few more mesh options. One of the things that we can do with this is let's go ahead and select this mesh, and we'll select it up here. And what we can do is let's go ahead and turn on these filters. So let's go ahead and turn the filter method to yes, and this will give us access to the relaxation and the tension. This can help sort of give us a little bit more of a thin type of liquid by letting this sort of look not quite so blobby. So by default, the relaxation is set to 0.1. 0.2 can also help a little bit. Once you start to go up a little higher, like say 0.3 and 0.4, then you start to realize parts of your mesh may disappear altogether. So this is definitely one to be careful with. So let's try something like 0.1, and I'll go ahead and simulate this. So by giving this now a little bit more relaxation, you can see sort of how this is not quite so blobby looking now. Now we have something that's quite a bit softer and a little bit more fluid looking. And again, this effect can actually become more if we were to take this relaxation up even a little bit higher. But like I said, you probably want to be careful about taking this up too high. Another option that we can talk about is optimization. Now if I go ahead and select this, and again, if we take a look at this mesh, what this actually looks like, we're dealing with a pretty dense mesh in these areas. So one thing that we could do is give it some optimization based on either curvature or based on its orientation to the camera. So if we were to turn this on based on curvature, okay, so let's go ahead and turn on this curvature, and we'll go ahead and resimulate this. And now looking at these, you can see that we have a mesh that's a little bit more dense in some of these areas of curvature, but in some of these flatter areas, you can see that it's not nearly quite so dense. So in some instances, this can give you an overall mesh that's a little less dense, but it does take quite a bit more time to actually calculate. So you'll definitely be adding some time to your simulation by using optimization. Some really interesting features, though, that are available to us. If we take a look at this circle, one of the really nice things that we have available to us is speed stretching. So I'm going to go ahead and turn on speed stretching, and just for the sake of demonstration, I'll go ahead and leave these values as they are. So again, this is another thing that will add a little bit to your overall simulation time, but it does give some nice effects. So based on the speed of an individual particle, the mesh can sometimes stretch into form and give you a little bit better simulation of a high speed moving particle. So I'm going to go ahead and simulate this real quick. So now with this speed stretching turned on, now we can really kind of get a nice look of a fast moving liquid, and this will kind of help get a little bit more of this distortion. Okay. One last thing that I want to do is to try to remove some of these ridges that we have in this pouring liquid. Okay, you can see we've got these really symmetrical ridges that are being caused by the particles themselves. So what we could do is let's go ahead and select this particle emitter, and underneath this circle emitter, let's go ahead and give it a little bit of randomization. So maybe 0.2 and 0.2. And I'll go ahead and simulate this real quick. Now you can see we've actually managed to introduce a little bit of randomization into this pouring water, so it's not just a completely straight stream of water. And we could increase or decrease this amount of randomization as much as we wanted to. So now that we've pretty much got this set up, let's talk briefly about how we can actually get this mesh data back into our other application like Maya or XSI. What we need to do first of all is let's take a look at the actual export central. So I'm going to go ahead and open this up. And what we need to do is we need to tell it to be able to export the meshes. Right now we just have this one mesh, so we'll go ahead and turn this on. And now that that's done, if I go ahead and rewind this, and then the next time I simulate this, now if you look closely in my timeline, you can see that in addition to this blue box, there's now a purple one that's underneath it. And if I open up my Windows Explorer and take a look at my meshes folder, now there's an actual mesh for each frame that we simulated so far. So this is really just like the particle data that we've cached, except now we're actually caching the mesh data, which this can now be imported through the Next Limit plugins that can plug into pretty much any 3D application, whether you're using 3D Studio Max or XSI or Maya, Houdini. Pretty much all the major packages have plugins that can then import this mesh data, and then later on in this kit we'll talk about how to actually go through that process of importing this into your 3D application. But once these have been imported, now you can actually use your high resolution rendering, so things like caustics, global illumination. Now those things can be brought in to give this a lot of realism. So I'm going to go ahead and just real quickly reset this data. And there's one thing that I want to do really quickly, and that's talk just for a second about how to set just some really basic keyframes. So I'm going to go ahead and decide that at frame, let's say maybe 25, this water stops pouring. Okay, so I can do that by keyframing the speed of this circle itself. So what I can do is with this speed selected and my frame picked, I can go ahead and just add a key, and then I'll go ahead and jump ahead one frame, and then I'll go ahead and set my speed to 0. So in other words, no particles will be emitted. Okay, I'll go ahead and add a key. Now one thing that I probably need to do is right click and let's take a look at the curve. And this is really similar to an animation curve that you would see in most programs, in most 3D applications. Now Realflow will automatically set a keyframe at frame 0 for your amount. In this case it was 2. So what I should probably do is go ahead and just delete that keyframe. So immediately we go from a rate of 2 to a rate of 0. So now when I simulate this, what we should see is this water stops pouring after about 25 frames. So I'll go ahead and reset this. So now when I play this through, we can actually see how the water will come down. We'll need to give this just a second to build the meshes. So it's going to be a little bit slow, but then as we play through this, you can see how this water will actually start to turn off and then flow away. So give this just a second to update. So now you can see how our water is pretty much turning off. So I'm going to go ahead and give you just a second to look at sort of what the final render of this would look like. So once we export this back into our original 3D package, whether it be Maya or XSI or 3D Studio Max, then you could render this out using MentalRay or whatever renderer happens to be included with that software. And then this is pretty much what you'll get. And what we actually come up with is a really nice liquid simulation. So the water splashes. We get a few splashes that sort of come up along the side of the glass. And then this settles down really pretty nicely. And like I said, toward the end of this kit, we'll actually talk about the entire process of getting these meshes back into your actual 3D package. So at this point, we've actually managed to finish our first sort of little mini project, but really we've only just barely begun to scratch the surface of what Realflow can actually do and what its capabilities are. So throughout the course of this kit, through the next several lessons, we'll really start to get into the nuts and bolts of what makes Realflow so special, and really kind of going beyond just the typical liquid simulation like what you see here. So for the next several lessons, we'll start to really get into the deep parts of Realflow.